Hey everybody, it's Pax. Today I'm joined with Adam Doyle, or Adam S. Doyle, one of the artists that works on quite a number of Fantasy Flight Games illustrations.
Hey everybody.
And so the reason that I'm talking with him today is because obviously it's the preview season for Arkham Horror, and we're starting to see some more new cards from the upcoming Drowned City set. And I was lucky enough to be given a preview card by Fantasy Flight Games, and the art features Adam S. Doyle. And it just so happens that Adam is an artist that has been working for and with FFG for a number of years across a couple of their games, notably Netrunner, which is the first card game I played from Fantasy Flight, that kind of got me into Arkham as well by being aware of the rest of their product line. Um, and so I thought it would give a good opportunity to kind of have a chat with Adam and discuss what goes into making the art for a company like Fantasy Flight Games. What works? What kind of processes are under the covers and behind the scenes that we maybe as the general consumer don't really understand or necessarily get a good look at. Yeah. So Adam, how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. It's great to be here. I love the Arkham community. Um, yeah, the gamers every time I've had any interactions, they've been really sweet and wonderful. So it's been really fun to be involved for a bunch of years now, like 8 years, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm an artist and freelance illustrator. I went to Rhode Island School of Design many years ago, and then sometime later got my master's at the School of Visual Arts for illustration, and have done all kinds of different projects over the years. Books have been a pretty significant part of that, which is something I really enjoy. And then card games. It became basically book covers and card games became quite a staple. So it's been great to be a part of like this family for so long with Arkham and just before that with Netrunner. Yeah.
Um, so I was saying kind of before we hit record,
Yeah.
the thing that I really enjoy about your art, and kind of starting with Netrunner, where it was like a cyberpunk game and everything was in virtual spaces, it captured that kind of like dreamlike virtual reality, something that's really otherworldly, and the way that your art has these really vivid and thick brush strokes and stuff through them, it gives it this kind of ethereal, wispy feeling a lot of the time. And I played Netrunner from maybe a year or two after it released, and right as Arkham released, my local Netrunner scene was kind of dying down. And from what I recall, I don't have it in front of me, but I think you started in with Arkham a couple of sets in. And so when I started seeing your art being introduced into the game, I got really excited because there's just so many iconic pieces of art that I remember from my time with Netrunner, where all I can think is like, this is like one of the defining things from Netrunner. I remember you, and I remember, oh, what's her name, Liga. She had
Yeah.
a whole bunch of
Yeah.
really amazing stuff, and it kind of
Chess Kane. Yeah, she's
that's
great. Yeah.
that's right, and it kind of has a similar quality, but obviously still distinct from one another.
Hmm.
In the way that the cyberspace is presented, and I think in Arkham, the translation of that is this kind of like fantasy horror dreamscape rather than a virtual reality one. And I guess I would just ask, like, what your approach to art seems to be, from what I've seen on your work that isn't just commissions for illustrations and stuff, and the fine art section and other things. It seems to be a really constant through line through your work, that kind of effect. And I was wondering if you could just kind of like speak towards
Okay.
why that is and kind of what the inspirations are behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my cat, but she's always needy when I'm talking to somebody else. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny, like the path of my work informs my work and my interests tend to be tend to be honestly like it's so fun and interesting and weird to be part of Netrunner and Arkham because the place that like my work naturally goes is nature, is much more around like wildlife and outdoors and trees and plants and nature. And in a way, Netrunner is kind of like the antithesis of that. And Arkham is so wonderfully creepy and textural and moody and atmospheric that like just as like an individual creative human being to have these completely different realms that invite exploration is something I really enjoy. So I'm going to answer your question, but I feel I have to kind of do it in something of a chronological way to kind
Yeah,
of
that's
build a
fine.
foundation.
That makes sense.
So, like I said, I'd been doing book covers, and so the first job I got from an art director for Arkham was to do a book cover. So it was this one, and what had happened at the time was that I actually loved Lovecraft. Like I read not all of his stories, but like a lot when I got that invitation, and I was like, "Oh, you guys have no idea who you're talking to. Like I'm so down for this." Um, so I just felt like really comfortable in his in the Lovecraftian mythos realms. I mean, it's so big. And again, like doing horror is not something I did much of on my own. It wasn't something, but I was like, oh, this is like a fun thing. I can dive into this. I can bring this to life. And I actually think for this book cover, they were basically like, come up with whatever you want, and we'll make it work. There was really no specific brief for the book cover.
That's really interesting. They put that kind of level and trust in,
Yeah.
having seen your work over the years in Netrunner, they're kind of like, well, this guy knows kind of like we know what he can do, and we imagine that we know he can put something together that's going to work really well. And I remember that book cover is it's stunning. It's the detail on it is really amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, there was a lot of trust. And to be honest, like one of the funny things, one of the big differences between being an artist and being an illustrator, if I'm just going to speak incredibly generally, art tends to be totally open-ended, and illustration tends to be a little bit more about fulfilling a specific purpose, a specific goal, and having some kind of framework to work within.
Mm-hmm.
So generally speaking, what I love about illustration is exactly that, is having essentially like a problem to solve, a conceptual problem to solve visually.
Right.
So when I did this cover, the thing that I was like, I need to bring to this image, to this cover is not just like the visual flourishes that Lovecraft conjures, but the sense of craziness, like the sense of dark lunacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that, um, yeah, I felt like I needed. That was a challenge that I brought up, and I had a lot of sketches for that one. I think one of the most of any project I've ever worked on. It was somewhere in the hundred something different ideas, different visual ideas, but not to get sidetracked. So I did that, and then eventually, not long after, got invited to do cards, and have been doing that ever since. But again, when I get the briefs coming through, it might just be like a couple, like a year, if that. It might be like three or four, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes some years it's more, some years it's less. So in total, I don't think I've done more than like 40. It's also like I don't know how people know this, but like when illustrators get briefs and then we do them, and then we have maybe somewhere in the vicinity of like 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, somewhere in there to do them from start to finish. It usually is like at least a year before they come out. And
That's
even
right.
then, when they come out, they sometimes change the names. So it's really tricky for me to keep track of like what cards are actually out in the world for those two reasons. So like when you mentioned the card, like obviously I remember doing it, but yeah, it's like, oh yeah, that hasn't come out yet. No, I guess not. Okay. It's a new one, right?
That's
And
right.
it,
Yeah.
it did have a name. Yeah, the hand of it's called Hand of Nodens now,
Hand
right?
of Nodens. Is it Gift of
Hand of
Nodens or
Nodens,
Hand of
yeah.
Nodens?
Yeah, so that attribute. So I want to remember that. So there's still that well maybe I generally addressed it, that question about like how my work is applicable. Um so that's living there. It's something I want to address maybe a little bit more. But what you're talking about right now in terms of like that specific card, also the process. So we can talk about that card in terms of as much as is cool for us to talk about it. But again, a lot of the attributes around that card in terms of what the brief says and what the end result is, like that process is something that is prereq it's not only really common, but like how it goes from basically being something specific to the end result being either right along the same path of that or turning out to be something quite different. That happens all the time, and that's all part of the process. And that's something that I'm happy to share a little bit about for the gamers, for the players, because I know that it's not something people would know, that there's no reason anyone would know this.
That's
And
right.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, just thinking about some of the art you've done for the game, I've got your website open, and there's one in particular, like, so many of them are these, landscape, um, some, kind of dreamy imagery of what's going on. The one that really jumps out to me is that reality acid with the big eye and the slime is swirling out of it. It
yeah,
it really evokes this like very abstract thing. It's not something that's actually happening in the game, but it's very much more of an emotional piece.
yeah,
But then you look at there was one that you had for the release before this one, the um, Feast of Hemlock Vale, and it's for Wilson Richards, and he's just kind of standing there holding a hammer,
yeah,
and it was very interesting to me. I remember seeing this piece and thinking like, "Oh, that's Adam." Oh,
yeah,
and then I looked at the
yeah.
zoomed in
They
version.
never give me those kind of normal, a person in daylight, like do like 3D realm type stuff. I never get that. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember. I remember thinking, "Oh, that's Adam," and then I went and found the high res version on your website, and I was like, "Oh yeah, no, I see it now." Right, like even like the patterns on the brick and his vest and everything, it all has that same quality. It's just it doesn't have that same it has a different amount of groundedness, I guess.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'm looking at it now. Yeah, the ad hoc image.
yeah. But I guess we can just talk right about the card that I was provided for the preview because it's kind of I'm not sure if you're aware, I guess, but Nodens is supposed to be the like one of the few kind of benevolent gods in the Cthulhu mythos. You know,
No, I didn't know that.
Nodens is far less outwardly evil or uncaring towards humans. And so this like really bright color scheme and stuff like that, it kind of conveys that. You can see clearly that there's like a hand reaching for something and they're gonna get it. If we could just kind of talk about how the original idea evolved from some of the earlier drafts to what we actually see on the card.
Right. So this is something I'm really happy to share with everybody, because we'll use this as an example. But again, what I'm about to say applies to essentially every card, which is that the team behind the scenes. So as far as I know, there's the writer, and then there's also art directors, right? And so what happens is the writer comes up with, I'm saying writer, but again, I'm sure there's more than just one person. Um, they come up with the idea, and that is then described in the brief. And obviously each card has mechanics, but for what's relevant to me, it's really just like what is the imagery, what is the intention of the imagery. So there's a combination of descriptions in the brief, and they're generally quite short. Generally, it's a few sentences at most. So it's something like a diver underwater with a bracelet, and from the bracelet, it's like reaching down and and grasping at something among like clams in the ocean, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's also in the brief, as I recall, descriptions around, the man's skin color, bald, he has like a nose clip, things like that, right? So so visually, this happens all the time. There's a lot of detail there, sometimes more, sometimes less. And and then what happens in the process of sketching is everyone, imagine every illustrator this, I'm talking about my own experience, is pretty much every time I get a brief, I'm seeing what I can do in sketches to explore this from different, we'll call it different angles, but it's much more than that because it's not like illustration is the same thing as taking a picture, right? So a lot of the times it's playing with different aspects of it. And so I did sketches, and if it's possible, like I'll share them with you,
Yeah.
where we see the diver a little bit from a distance, so we can see the whole body. We can see the length of this magical ethereal hand coming from his wrist, reaching down. And we're looking at it from the side, we're looking at it from the top, looking down, we're looking down, looking up. So I'm trying all these different potential vantage points and enhancing some things over other things because again in the brief sometimes I don't know essentially like what ends up becoming more important versus something else. And so I'll do a bunch of sketches and then I'll pick out from those in the matter of weeks. I'll pick out from those and send those a few of those back to the art director, and the art director will say, okay, this direction is working better. Let's go with this direction, but could you change this and that? And what ends up happening, here's another universal thing that happens. What ends up happening all the time is that the process of exploring and making discoveries, because as much as the writer and the brief, there's some idea in their head, part of the beautiful relationship between the writers, storytellers, editors, and the art people like me is is the expectation that there's going to be discoveries, there's going to be things that we come up with that are unexpected, and it's great. Like everyone loves when that happens. So there are times where it's like right on the money, and like with Ad Hoc, we were just talking about that, where it was like a guy holding a hammer and he's in the shade, right? And that's it. And we're done. It's perfect. Like that's what it's about. And there's other times where it needs to be like the description is like it's I mean, there's some older ones I can read, but it's basically like a looming cloud of mist over a city, and like that can go a million different ways.
That's right.
So that's what happens a lot of the time. It happens with Netrunner too, where I'm exploring, I'm trying things out, and something just kind of works, and it's not all those other details become irrelevant, and we're not going to go in this direction. And oftentimes that leads to even the title changing and it becoming a different card because of that relationship.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it's funny, thinking about it from that kind of mechanical versus thematic thing. It's like the text on this card is really immaterial to that process, right? They might be designing cards, kind of maybe after this art prompt has been sent to you, maybe in tandem with the art prompt having been sent to you. I know that the testing period is at least a year in advance of actual product releases, from the perspective of play testing it, getting all the copies, getting a copy print sent to you to make sure that there's no errors in it, all of the formatting they need to do to get these laid out properly, and then actually mass printed and shipped.
Right.
Right? There's a long delay there too, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they send this art prompt out to you and what the actual text is on the card has shifted quite a lot as well. And one of the things that I like that really stayed in this from the original prompt, certain aspects kind of getting dropped and certain aspects getting a higher level of importance kind of in hindsight, maybe, or after having seen what you've done and the directions you've taken it, their art direction kind of goes, how much importance did we actually need for each of these aspects? Because I remember in the prompt, it's meant to depict a man of a dark skin color, and it's like, with the way the lighting is, you can't really tell.
Yeah,
But
all that becomes irrelevant,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's what happens along the way. It's
yeah,
yeah,
and
exactly what
the
you're saying.
one thing that I really like that is maintained is, and it might be tough to tell on the printed card, because when you look at the card in front of you, it's not much smaller than your phone, right?
It's so small.
Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes, especially with your work, I find that some of your work, when it gets scaled down like that, it loses a little bit of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
really fine work, that
Yeah.
intricate line work that goes through them. And I'm worried that people might miss this on the printed card if I don't point it out now. Is the original prompt had this idea of the bracelet with the little elder sign amulet, and that's that little, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
not a pentagram, but a little star symbol,
Yeah.
and that's where this mystical arm that's reaching out towards, I don't know if it's oysters or pearls or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
is originating from, right? And it's cool to me that this is kind of rather than a perspective of looking in at someone diving down, it's very much right on the shoulder of that person, reaching towards what they need, maybe being a little out of reach and getting that little bit of extra help from this kind of benevolent otherworldly force. And I think it, considering the template of the cards, that kind of circular template that goes around this type of card, and all of the types of cards in the game have different borders, frames around the art. You can see the tail end of some coral and some sea anemones and stuff like that. That sometimes that gets lost a little bit. And it's always a bit of a shame when that happens. There's a lot of really great art in Arkham that sometimes little details like that fall by the wayside just because something's got to be the focus.
Yeah, yeah. It comes to the territory. So when we get the briefs, we also get the card template, like
Right.
what the frame is going to be like, and that's something that you kind of, as an illustrator, you kind of learn along the like early on. The prompt is inviting something that, let's say, is would make perfect sense as a horizontal. I'm just going to say hypothetically, it's something like an ocean scene. And so generally speaking, that's going to make much more sense as a horizontal. But there are times where the card, the space, the framing is actually it's vertical.
That's
So
right.
that's another challenge. Part of the illustrator's job is to just make it work, to figure out, even though like it would make more sense graphically, visually, narrative in a visual way to go orient this way, the card's going to be this way, and that's you got to figure it out. So that
That's
goes
right.
with orientation and the framing. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the ones you sent me, the Tenebrous Eclipse.
Hmm.
It's the one with the eclipse going on, and there's the
Right.
tendrils coming through the sky, and then you see the frame of the art is this keyhole.
Right. Right.
And so you're right. You get the sky, you got the tree line. It works pretty well in this kind of vertical framing because you're looking at a bunch of elements all lined up in a row like that. But I understand what you mean.
Right. And there are definitely times as well, where when I'm working on the image and composing and figuring it out, and I'm taking into account the shape, like, I can, if it's like circular, for example, there are times where I'm going to enhance the composition in a circular way to make it all feel like it's working, like it's supporting itself, right? I don't want to make something that is clashing with the frame, unless for some reason that kind of makes sense. But ultimately, it's like, yeah, a lot of times the compositions are really being dictated by the shape of that frame in a way so that it all kind of plays together really nicely. Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
Okay, so this is what I was talking about. And again, in the description, it talked about all these really colorful coral reef. So again, I'm essentially early on in the sketches, this happens all the time, where I'm taking everything into account. Okay, I'm going to depict everything. And then I just try playing around with, like I was talking about. And again, I just want to emphasize that with this one, it's like particularly cinematic in a way. Like the whole scene is somewhat literal. And from my work that there are times where the prompts or the imagery is way more like surreal and creepy and ethereal.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times where the prompts are just basically like a little bit more like along those lines, where it's just way open-ended and I'm just figuring it out. So I was treating this initially more like, oh, this ethereal hand coming from the bracelet is doing something, is helping this guy out in a way that would be for him much more challenging. That was the narrative logic I was exploring and looking
Oh,
at
okay.
here.
Yeah, I see that. Right, like it's
Like
where it's in
this,
and
like he
amongst
can't
something.
get to this object down here. So in this case, I
Mm-hmm.
just threw in a little crown, and I was thinking like, okay, it's sort of like it can do something he can't do. And then ultimately along the way, when I shared the sketches, the art director was like, oh no, change it for this reason and that reason. And essentially it's always like a trust thing. Like they know what they're doing, right? I'm trying things out and exploring things, and they're letting me know what's working and what isn't. So yeah, it ultimately went a little bit more in this kind of direction towards the end there.
Now, I do have a question. Kind of. I know. I'm pretty sure this is answered on your website, but the actual final illustration that you do,
Mhm.
is that largely with like traditional materials, kind of supplemented with a bit of digital modifications? Is that
That's right.
generally how it goes?
Yeah, it's still how I work, and I stick by it. It is a bit of a pain in the neck, but it's still what works best for me. So I use Photoshop, so I work between oil paints and Photoshop, and I go back and forth between the two. When I'm doing like what I call my fine art work, it's just oil paints, right? It's an actual object in real life, and it's all oil paint.
Hmm.
Actually, this spring I'm gonna be doing a big mural, and that's gonna be acrylic, and that's gonna be outside. So that's like
Oh, I
the
saw
actual.
that on your blog.
Oh
I
yeah,
saw
I
some of the
haven't I haven't
mock-ups
like
that looked that
thanks.
those are going to be really really special. I'll pop a photo of those mock-ups
Cool.
up right now because
Yeah.
those looked awesome. I'm not surprised that that the I'm not sure if it's a municipality or city or something is going for those, but
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about it. I'm a little overwhelmed, but I'm excited about it. Yeah, it's a big wall. So but for yes, my process with Arkham and with Netrunner, basically all my illustration work is I start with sketches as we've addressed,
hmm.
but then I do go to paint. So I paint everything out with oil. And so this is something you brought up earlier, and I want to acknowledge that, which is what we're referring to as style, the whole brush stroke aspect of it.
Hmm.
So that's something that is important to me. But like I guess the thing I'm also an art teacher, so I also feel it's important to communicate that there's more to it than just style, right?
Hmm.
So the brush strokes are important to me because there's something of a genuine magic there that I really adore, which is how the simple stroke of paint um, can communicate to the viewer a transformation of a blank surface into something that is alive or a space or a place, right?
Hmm.
It's an illusion, but the stroke, when it still has a little bit of visibility to it, is something of a it's something of like the door is partly open between these both of these worlds. So I paint everything out and then I scan that in and then incorporate it and assemble it digitally in Photoshop and then develop it and refine it in Photoshop and get it
Okay.
all tidied up. So yeah, it's basically an analog slash digital process that goes hand in hand.
How does the scanning process work? I just out of this is more of out of professional curiosity because
Sure.
I'm an engineer and so we have huge massive plotters with enormous scanners, but it's always like blueprints and stuff. So I'm just curious how scanning a large canvas works.
So it's not that big. Basically, well, what happens is I have this drafting table and I work on sheets that are somewhere in the ballpark of like um, you know 12 by 16 inches, something like that.
Okay.
And then I paint. And what I will oftentimes do, and I've mentioned this to my students too as an approach, which is I'll paint. Sometimes it'll be the whole image, sometimes it'll be parts of the image, and then scan those in and then reassemble them digitally. And the reason for doing multiple versions or different aspects of one image separately is that once I'm in the digital space, then I can either combine them together or I can pick which one's working best, right? If I'm actually painting, I'm doing three versions of a horse's head, then I can pick, oh, this horse's head turned out the best, and this is I'm going to use, or maybe part of the head and part of the neck and part of the ears and reassemble them.
Hmm.
So ultimately, the goal is that it looks completely seamless, but the process can be a little bit of a like a compositing thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, and I again, I'm quite a bit of a layman when it comes to art, but it does make sense that if you were to paint it by hand, doing it a number of times and merging them together digitally would kind of help you get past any like, oh, I need to throw this whole thing out because it didn't turn out exactly how I
Yeah,
meant it to, right?
exactly,
You draw it two
exactly.
or three
It's a
times and
forgiving process.
you
Yeah,
get the 99% on each of them and you can kind of weasel out those imperfections.
yeah, exactly.
That makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense.
yeah. There are times where I find that I can sort of lean a little bit too far into just doing it all digitally. Um, and I think this is one of the classes I teach is digital drawing and painting, and so I feel like that because digital can look, if not done well, can look really digital. That I generally find that my work does look best. It it just has the most kind of vitality to it and energy and authenticity to it when I'm really anchoring it all with real paint and then touching it up more as opposed to just using the tools in Photoshop, which just can look overly digital. That's all.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean by that. I've also there's one thing I've noticed it with other artists, but I don't think I've ever seen it, at least not for any of the pieces that you've drawn that you've that exist in the game and also exist on your website as like a high res version. There's some art that Fantasy Flight does on their cards. They've got a big. I mean, obviously a warehouse isn't the right term for it. A big repository of art from the years, right? They've been making Arkham games for a long time.
Yeah.
They can pull art out from like 10 years ago, and kind of, if they need to, edit it themselves.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, kind of, one of the things that I usually notice that they edit is like the brightness or maybe the contrast. And I'm wondering, does much of that happen digitally for you? Like when I look at Gift of Nodens here, the swirling hand, it it really looks like it's illuminated, and
Mhm.
I'm just curious if like is that just you doing the magic on the page, or is that something where some amount of digital enhancement kind of helps give it that like shine effect to it?
Mhm. It's a little bit of both. I mean, what I want to say is that it's really primarily coming from the art
Mm-hmm.
background. It's coming from a place of understanding essentially how to capture contrast in a way that feel luminous. Like there are things that as artists that we can do um, to make something look like it's lighting up, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously something that can be a big part of Netrunner, for example, is this general kind of um, vibe and quality where like everything is self-illuminated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I would say 85, 90% is just having that ability to and it's more not necessarily an ability as much as an understanding, like to just look at things and understand like how light works. But
Um,
just to be fair, there is also a small percentage of that at the end when I am working digitally, where I'm able to sort of layer things in such a way where there's a little bit of I am getting a little bit of help. I'm getting a little bit of help from Photoshop. But another thing that I think you said though is that because this can happen where the illustrator turns it in and it's done, and then on the other side the team there ends up doing a little bit more tweaking in some way.
mm-hmm.
Feel like maybe you were asking about
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
In fact, there was an art piece recently where the room went from this dark black room of like a police interviewing someone to it being like a really well lit room, and the
Mm.
guy was the guy that was being interviewed had aged up 60 years. He was a young guy and he was an old guy. So that was just more of a curiosity of to
Yeah,
what extent. Um, maybe like to what extent of an understanding the kind of turnover process is, where it's like once you've given it to them, uh, what's that process look like? The understanding of they're kind of able to make these modifications, or if that's
yeah,
something unique from illustrator to illustrator.
right. So part of essentially in the agreement that we sign, there's a note that essentially, as I recall, because it's pretty standard for illustrators, that says something along the lines of, um, ultimately on our end as the producers of this, if we need to make tweaks, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as illustrators, we know that that's a possibility. Generally speaking, though, it really doesn't happen. It really doesn't happen to me. Um, and I think part of the reason why it really doesn't happen is because like that's something that should be sorted out with the illustrator involved. It should like to go and to make the change. It really generally, if that's going to happen, it's going to be because something happened later on, maybe in the narrative or something else that led a decision. And it was like, well, this has been completed. The illustrator's busy. That was 6 months ago.
Right.
I think if they could reach out and let the illustrator know, that'd be great, but they're not obligated to. But I do want to say, so for me, really never happens. Never ever happens. Also, because you want to maintain a good relationship with your illustrators. If you're changing things after they're done with it, ultimately, like they're not going to feel good about that. But there was one exception, and I was just looking at my screen to because I forgot the name of it. there's one time there's this card called Restless Journey, and I thought they did a really cool thing with it. I don't, yeah, I thought it was pretty neat. So I
Yes.
can include this image, right? So you have my website, right? So the
Yep.
one I finished was, one, I don't remember which one it was. It's like this figure glowing this luminous rainbow colors, and they ended up releasing it with the same image with three different colored versions.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. And part of the last thing I'll say about that is, and I don't remember the specifics because it was a bunch of years ago, but 2019. I probably did it in 2018. There's probably a long, because it happens a lot where I have the brief, I'm doing a bunch of versions, and like we were talking about earlier, where they're like, "Oh, this is cool. We're gonna go in this direction." So I might have submitted different colored versions as well. I don't remember. But it's
Mm-hmm.
a really reasonable question that you're asking about, like how it when it's done, is it really done? And what happens with when there's changes.
They do this a couple of times where the difference in the art between cards that have the same title but maybe like slightly different effects from one another just have like slight variations.
Mm.
Very, and it's usually like a color grading thing, right? This blue purple, green yellow, red pink kind of color
Yeah.
grading. This is another piece. I don't know. I'm just gonna fanboy out. Like there's so many there's so
Oh,
many pieces in this game that you do that I just they're among my favorites. And there's a reason that I was excited to get this card and reach out to you because I think that you bring something really special to the game. Another one that I love is the Eye of Truth, mostly because the card itself is amazing, but because like it just suits it suits what the card is doing so well. Like it's I don't know. It's beautiful. Um. Okay.
I mean,
So
one of the things that I think is interesting. Sorry, I just had this thought come
yeah,
to mind
go for
because
it.
I think this is like full on respect to Fantasy Flight Games is how they're able to keep coming up with ideas, right? Like with concepts, and keeping it fresh and interesting. I'm trying to find the Eye of Truth. Okay, yeah, that's the one. And they did that as a box cover too, which was
Yep,
nice.
that's right.
It kind of has like a little bit of referencing money in a weird way. Yeah. So yeah, I just think it's great to keep getting prompts and it's not stepping on in the same territory. It's also with Netrunner, like same kind of thing to keep it fresh and interesting because there have been like moments in over the years where I'm doing something and it feels similar to something else, but by and large, it's nice that like how expansive these realms are that we can keep exploring and trying new things and maintaining an overall sense of this all exists in the same universe, but it just keeps going and it's fun and it's yeah, it's nice to be able. And one of the things I love is being able to explore and invent, right? As opposed to working on some kind of IP. And some people are great at this and they love it, but I haven't worked on like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or anything like that. And the people who do like that's what they love to do. What I love to do is just give me a little something and just let me explore, and that feels really fulfilling to be able to just kind of come up with stuff because I don't know what it is until I'm doing it, right? Like I don't come with a preconceived, oh, I can't wait. I just want to paint vampire bunnies or whatever. Like they just throw stuff at me and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go with this. And then sometimes it goes in expected directions and a lot of times it goes unexpected directions. That's really fun. So I like being able to invent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a thing that you know it's really neat when your work takes on that kind of like playful energy.
Hmm.
I don't get this myself a lot in my professional career because I'm an engineer and it's very prescriptive.
Hmm.
You've really got to stay in between the lines. But in hobbies and stuff like that, I need to get that from my hobbies because it is something I think that's kind of essential to the human experience. Is that
Yeah.
that sense of wonderment, that sense of
Yeah.
play, of a lack of inhibition, and just kind of like seeing where you go. And it's something that's really great about art is you can kind of you get, especially with someone kind of your caliber and talent, it lets you explore kind of a mastery and your aim and your ability with that sense of play, and it results in some really really beautiful work that really elevates the game. And in a way, I think a lot of people it's easy to gloss over, but I think a way that a lot of people do still really appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, what you just described, I 100% agree with you. As a human being, from one human being to another, having space to imagine and play is really important. So, like, I'm glad that you have this game in your life as a way to um, um, participate in that. And it also just brought to mind how, in many ways, how similar it is in terms of your and the player's engagement with the game is one of playing and problem solving and also collaboration. And that's such a fundamental part of what I'm doing too in my own space in isolation, working on these images is it's collaboration with the team over there. And it's definitely playing and being imaginative. So yeah, it's cool how like in some ways completely different and also very at the core of it very similar
Yeah, that's
the
right.
experiences.
I feel like a lot of people, especially, and I get this a bit as being an engineer, a lot of people don't appreciate just like how much work goes into large
Hmm.
projects like a card game, right? Like if you look at the credits in the back of any of the rules manuals, there's an art director and there's all these
Right,
creative directors and
right.
there's, you know, consultants for oh shoot, what's the term? Like cultural consultants and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Especially one of their releases was like a globe trotting campaign where you went everywhere all over the world, and they had a huge list of people that just did like, you know, oh, there's a scenario happening in Shanghai in the 1920s. Well, here's someone that would know whether what we've written makes sense at all for what's
yeah,
going on in the 1920s in
yeah,
Shanghai, right?
yeah, yeah.
And sometimes it's really easy to kind of take a look at the end product and not appreciate how many layers there is to what the end goal is. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to
So
talk to
Brad,
me.
Brad, let me just in response to that, and a part of my brain is thinking, should we include this? But the point you're making right now is about like your audience and the interest in what's going on behind the scenes. And so I think this is a relevant point, which is that when I watch a movie and the credits roll, I turn it off, right? I switch to something else because I don't want to sit there for 10 minutes and watch all these names. But there are times where there's like a video that's behind the scenes where I'm watching how something was constructed. And that's really interesting. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow, they had all these people holding these things and the green screen and all and then it's going through this process. So I think that what you're going to do here with our conversation is one where even though, and it's fair, most people aren't preoccupied with all that's going on behind the scenes. What it really comes down to is when you just show that to people, when you have like we're doing, have a conversation and you show some imagery and you talk about the process. I think that's how you get people interested. You
That's
don't just
right.
say like,
Yeah.
look, there's all these names here. It's we're inviting people in and saying we're again we're human beings and we're actively involved in the creation of this. And so just by sharing that from the heart and talking about it, I think this is the best thing you can do, a person could ask for to then feel like, oh, this is actually interesting.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I
Yeah,
guess.
it's been a real treat.
Yeah. Talking to you another time. Hopefully, that'd be a lot of fun.
Totally. I'm down anytime. Yeah. I mean, the last thing I'd say is, I appreciate you inviting me to chat and talk about my work and talk about the game. Um, because like I said at the beginning, like it's such a great community and I work in almost complete isolation other than the contact I have with the art director. So yeah, just to have the opportunity to feel a little bit more connected to the community, it feels really good for me. So I appreciate the interest and it's really lovely to be able to talk with you about it.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam.
All right, sure thing.